When I held the DNA test results in my hands, my whole world came crashing down. I used to think betrayal was something that happened to others. Something shown in movies or discussed on the evening news. But in that moment, I realized that there is nothing more painful than realizing you've been used by the ones you loved the most, Emily, my wife, my best friend, my rock. She didn't just betray me. She went further. She made me believe that the baby I was rocking in my arms, looking into my eyes and smiling at me, was mine. It was a lie, and I didn't just find out about the cheating. I found out that all those months she'd been staring into my eyes, pretending, lying, playing the part of the perfect wife. Hiding the truth. The child I loved turned out to be the son of her boss, a man I had never met but who was now the main source of my pain and hatred. Now I had nothing left. Nothing but the desire to know the truth and regain control of my life. And if Emily thought I would just accept that, she was sorely mistaken. Emily was always the center of attention. Her smile could light up any room and her energy infected everyone around her. She was the kind of woman men wanted to be around and women wanted to emulate. To me, Jack Wilson, she became everything. We met 6 years ago at a party at a mutual friend's house. At the time, I was just starting out as an engineer at a small company, and she was already building a career in the marketing department of a large corporation. Her confidence and determination won me over from the first minute. We got married 2 years after we met. I remember that day like it was yesterday. Emily wore a snow-white dress, her eyes shone with happiness, and her voice shook with excitement as she said her vows. I believed that we would build a perfect life together. In the early years, our marriage was indeed a happy one. We spent evenings discussing plans for the future, traveling, laughing about the little things, and dreaming of children. I worked days on end to provide everything we needed, and Emily built a career, gradually climbing the ladder, but everything changed the day she got a promotion. When Emily told me that her new boss was the successful and ambitious Jonathan Hale, I didn't pay much attention. She often talked about her colleagues, and as usual, I listened half-heartedly. But after a couple of months, I began to notice a change in her behavior. Emily started coming home from work later. She often mentioned Jonathan in conversation. Jonathan said, Jonathan decided, Jonathan wants to try a new approach. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. I was proud of her accomplishments and believed that her passion for her work was just a desire to achieve more. One night when we were having dinner, she suddenly said, Jack, you don't mind if I go on a company retreat, do you? It's only for a couple days, but Jonathan wants me to attend. Of course I don't mind, I replied without thinking. Emily looked at me gratefully, but there was something else in her gaze. I couldn't catch it at the time, but now I knew it was guilt. After the trip, Emily returned home like a different person. She became distracted, her thoughts often wandering off into the distance. When I tried to ask her what was wrong, she waved me off. It's all right, Jack. Just a lot of work. I wanted to believe her. But in the back of my mind, something told me she wasn't telling me the whole story. One night I woke up one night to find she wasn't in bed. I found her in the kitchen, where she was sitting with her phone in her hands, staring nervously at the screen. Why are you awake? I asked. Emily flinched and quickly hid her phone. I just can't sleep. We have an important presentation tomorrow and I'm worried. I nodded, trying to calm myself down. But after this incident, my trust was starting to fray. After a few weeks, I noticed that Emily began to avoid intimacy. She always made excuses, tired, headache, too much work. I began to wonder if it had something to do with the fact that she no longer saw me as a man. One night when she was in the shower, I saw that her phone had been left on the nightstand. I didn't want to violate her personal space, but something inside me made me pick up the phone. The screen was locked, but a message from JH popped up on it. You looked amazing today. See you tomorrow. My heart sank. I tried to convince myself that it could have just been a friendly message from a coworker. But the words "you looked amazing" sounded too personal. When Emily came back from the bathroom, I pretended everything was fine. But fear settled inside of me. A couple months later, Emily gave me the news that was to be a happy moment in our lives. "Jack, I'm pregnant," she said, her eyes shining with joy. I was stunned. It was unexpected, but I hugged her, trying to hide my mixed feelings. "It's beautiful, Emily," I said, but I was still gnawing with doubt. Eventually the joy began to overshadow the suspicion. I was sure I was going to be a good father. I even began to think my fears were unfounded, but everything changed when the baby was born. When I held the baby for the first time, I felt proud and happy. But there was one thing I couldn't get over: the baby had brown eyes, even though both Emily and I had blue eyes. At first I dismissed the thought. But after a few weeks, the doubt returned. I started looking for information. I learned that brown eyes could be the result of a genetic mutation, but the likelihood of that was too small. My disbelief grew. One day I decided that I could no longer live in uncertainty. I took a sample of the baby's DNA and sent it to the lab. The results were supposed to come back in a few weeks. Those weeks were the hardest weeks of my life. Emily didn't suspect anything. She continued to play the role of the perfect wife and mother. But every time I looked at her, I could feel the chasm growing between us. When the results finally came in, I felt the ground go from under my feet. Probability of paternity, 0%. When I first saw the results of the DNA test, my body felt numb. The air in the room felt thick and I couldn't breathe. A hurricane of emotions exploded inside me: shock, anger, resentment, and then emptiness. I sat at the kitchen table, examining every letter on the document as if it could make a difference. Probability of paternity, 0%. Those words were like a hammer blow. I tried to stand up, but my legs wouldn't obey me. The piece of paper fell out of my hands and landed on the floor, slowly rippling as the final symbol of the destruction of my life. How could she? Why? I remembered the moment Emily had informed me she was pregnant. Her eyes were shining, she was smiling, hugging me. I felt like the happiest person in the world then. And now that memory only made me bitter. When I first saw the results of the DNA test, my body felt numb. The air in the room felt thick and I couldn't breathe. A hurricane of emotions exploded inside me: shock, anger, resentment, and then emptiness. I sat at the kitchen table, examining every letter on the document as if it could make a difference. Probability of paternity, 0%. Those words were like a hammer blow. I tried to stand up, but my legs wouldn't obey me. The piece of paper fell out of my hands and landed on the floor, slowly rippling as the final symbol of the destruction of my life. How could she? Why? I remembered the moment Emily had informed me she was pregnant. Her eyes were shining, she was smiling, hugging me. I felt like the happiest person in the world then. And now that memory only made me bitter. I couldn't stop thinking about her smile. Was it genuine? Or was it a mask? Every moment we had together now seemed fake. My mind tossed between wanting to find out the whole truth and the overwhelming pain. I looked up at the pictures on the wall. Emily and I on our first vacation together in Italy. The two of us on our wedding day. The baby in her arms, smiling at me for the first time. That baby. My heart felt like it was being torn apart. Did I deserve this? What did I deserve? But one thought was clear: I couldn't just sit back and let these lies continue. I had to act. That evening I waited a long time for Emily to put the baby down. I watched the clock, listened to her footsteps upstairs. My anger grew with each passing moment. I pictured her face, her reaction, and I didn't know what I would say when she showed up. When she finally came downstairs, she had a glass of wine in her hands. Her face glowed with calmness. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and she looked as serene and confident as ever. "How was your day, Jack?" she asked, sitting down beside me. Her voice was warm, sincere. And it made me even angrier. "Can you explain something to me?" My voice was flat, but there was metal in it. Emily frowned, her smile gone. "What are you talking about?" I slowly pulled a folded piece of paper out of my pocket. My hands were shaking, but I managed it. I placed the document on the table in front of her. her eyes widened as she read the first lines. I noticed her exhale as if all the air had been knocked out of her. She turned pale, Jack. Her voice was barely audible, but I interrupted, "No, Emily. You can't lie anymore." "Who is he?" She was silent. Her gaze wandered somewhere between the table and me. Like she was looking for a way out. "Do you want to know who he is?" She finally whispered. "It's Jonathan." Her words were like a slap. They echoed in my head. I felt my hands clench into fists. "Jonathan Hale. Your boss." My voice was low, filled with anger. She nodded, avoiding my gaze. "How long had this been going on?" I asked. "It was only once," she said quickly. "At a corporate party. It was a mistake." I laughed, but it was a bitter, angry laugh. "A mistake?" "The mistake lasted 9 months, Emily. The mistake was born into the world." Her face contorted in pain. She started to say something, but I held up my hand, silencing her. "You lied to me. You made me believe that this baby was mine. You laughed in my face. How could you?" Emily began to cry. She sobbed, apologized, said it was weakness, that she didn't know how to tell me the truth, but I couldn't listen anymore. After her confession, I left home. Walking through the deserted streets, I remembered our best moments. Our first kiss. How we picked out rings. Her laughter as we watched silly comedies in the evenings. I also remembered how she gradually drifted away from me. Her late returns from work. Her excuses. I realized that all of these signals were in front of me, but I ignored them because I loved her. Now I questioned everything. Was our marriage really a happy one? Or was I just unwilling to notice the truth? My thoughts about Jonathan grew more and more gloomy. That man had ruined my life. He took away my confidence, he took my family away from me. I decided that revenge would be my goal. I began by examining his life. His career, his family, his weaknesses. I realized that his reputation was the most important thing he had. Sarah, his wife, was the key to my plan. I knew that if she found out the truth, her anger would be even greater than mine. When I confronted Sarah, I noticed her confident expression had changed to one of alarm. "What's wrong?" she asked. I put the evidence folder in front of her. "Your husband cheated on you with my wife. This is their child." She read the documents. Her face was stony, but I could see the emotion boiling inside her. "I should have known," she whispered. "He'd always been like this," but I'd turned a blind eye. We discussed what to do next. Sarah said divorce was just the beginning. She wanted to make his career fall apart. When Jonathan lost his job, his life began to fall apart. Sarah filed for divorce. His co-workers found out about the scandal, and no one wanted to work with him. Emily tried to regain my trust, but I knew our marriage was beyond repair. When I woke up every morning to an empty apartment, it was hard for me to believe that it was all true. I sat on my bed and looked at the space around me. Everything was the same as before. But everything was different. The smell of her perfume was in the room, her coffee cup was still on the nightstand. I couldn't get rid of these small details that had once brought me happiness, but now they only caused longing and pain. My heart clenched at the thought of her lies, how she was able to keep the truth from me. It was like a knife in my back that she slowly stuck in until I realized the depth of the betrayal. Her words still echoed in my head, and the look in her eyes, that lifeless look she gave me when I asked her why she couldn't be honest. I visualized that moment over and over again, and each time I found it harder and harder to breathe. I stood up and walked over to the window. Outside, everything seemed normal. People went about their business, cars drove by. But I couldn't look at this world without pain anymore. It wasn't the same as it used to be. Maybe I was naive to believe that our love was eternal. But what to do with that knowledge now? How do I live with the fact that not only my wife, but my own life that I had built had turned out to be a lie? It had been a few weeks since Emily had left. I was deciding what I was going to do next, and though thoughts of revenge filled my mind, I realized that it wouldn't help me regain what was lost. I tried to live without her, but every morning, every evening, I felt something missing. I had been a part of her life for so long, and now that piece of me was left somewhere out there, in the past, in the void I was trying to fill. And so, as I sat down to dinner, the doorbell rang again. I opened it and saw her. Emily was standing in front of me. There was so much pain in her eyes that I couldn't ignore it. Her voice didn't have the confidence it had before, now it sounded confused. "Jack, I want to talk," she said with difficulty. I couldn't say a word, just looked at her in silence. She was my wife, but now that I saw her, everything seemed foreign. "What do you want to talk about?" I finally found the strength to speak. My voice was calm, but with a coldness that surprised me. Emily took a step forward and held out her hands as if to apologize, but her gestures weren't what I'd once considered sincere. She sat down in the chair across from me, and all I could see in her eyes was worry. "Jack, I was wrong," she began, trying to hold back tears. "I realize how much I hurt you. I didn't think about the consequences, I didn't think about us. It was wrong." I was silent, not knowing what to say. Everything was swirling around in my head. I wanted to scream, to blame her for what she had done. But I also couldn't help but remember those moments when she was mine. I wanted to believe it was all possible to forget, but all I felt was a deep emptiness. I didn't know what to say. My feelings were mixed. I could feel my pain flooding over me, but more importantly, I realized that this meeting wasn't going to change anything. "Will you tell me what I should do?" I finally asked without raising my head. "You've already decided, Emily. You made the decision for both of us. And now you come in and want to fix something, but it's not that easy." I saw her face turn red with shame. She started to speak again, but I interrupted her. "I'm not ready to forgive, Emily. I don't know how I can move on. I don't believe in us anymore. There's nothing in us anymore." Her face turned pale, and tears finally rolled down her cheeks. She tried to say something, but I knew words couldn't help anymore. After she left, I was alone, and the memories filled me. It was like a fog that wouldn't let me rest. I pictured our first day together over and over again. I was sitting in a cafe, drinking coffee, and suddenly she appeared. Those eyes, that look, her calm breathing. We started talking, and that conversation was the beginning of everything. I will never forget the way she laughed when I told her stories from my childhood. We had so many moments together. Our travels, our night walks, our conversations until dawn. We made plans, dreamed of the future. Of growing old together. Every word she said back then sounded so sincere, and I believed we were on the right path. But now, looking back, I couldn't understand when everything changed. When she started lying to me, I often thought back to our first vacation, sitting on the beach in Italy. We were holding hands then, looking at the sea, and it seemed like nothing could destroy our love. But it seemed that it was just a beautiful moment, an illusion created by us. It's been a few months. I decided that I needed to move on, despite all the pain. My life could not stay in the same position. I started exercising, restoring my body and soul. I went on weekend trips to the mountains where I could find peace and quiet. Sometimes I would sit at the top and look at the world around me. Everything seemed so huge and I was just a part of it. Life went on, and I began to realize that my feelings were no longer holding me in place. I needed to learn to let go, to learn to forgive. But it wasn't an easy process. I struggled with myself every day. I had to revisit memories and look at a future I could no longer see with Emily. More time passed, and I met the woman who was helping me recover. She was different, not like Emily. She was calmer, more confident, and understood that I needed space to be the person I used to be. We began to communicate, and with each passing day, I felt like I was regaining my ability to trust. She was like a light at the end of the tunnel for me. We started walking around the city, discussing music, literature. She respected my pain and allowed me to be who I was in that moment. But in her presence I began to feel that I could open up again, that it was possible to find love and trust. Years later, Emily came back to my town. I was already a different person. I didn't expect anything from her. When she approached me, I was ready to meet her with a look that held no anger or pain. I was just calm. We talked about the past, about how things had changed. But I knew that this meeting was the last. We were both on different paths, and I didn't want to go back to the emptiness we'd had before. Life went on and I knew everything was going to be okay. My new girlfriend became my best friend and partner. And I began to build a new relationship with confidence. Emily was out of my life and I was no longer the person I was before. I learned to value myself and my ability to forgive. I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I became stronger. And perhaps it was this process of recovery that was my true redemption.